Hello, this is the seventh edition of Rhetoric Remix. Rhetoric Remix is a regular series of live stream broadcasts where we invite contributions from eminent practitioners, professors, speechwriters from around the globe to talk on some aspect of rhetoric or public speaking, where kind of rhetoric impinges on civil life and academic life. Today, we are joined by Professor Eric Smith, who's Professor of Rhetoric at York College, Pennsylvania. I'll let him introduce himself probably far better than I can. But anyway, we're going to be talking with Eric today about the state of debate, and I know he's got some very interesting ideas to share on that, and also on the kind of potential growing tensions between what one might call active and the sphere. So it's a great pleasure to have Eric here with me, and we'll be having a kind of a conversation really about these things, but I'm sure Eric will kick off. It's great to have you here. Thanks so much for joining me, Eric.
For having me. So I'll just introduce myself.
Yeah, and if I'm great.
Okay. I am Eric Smith, a professor of rhetorical studies at York College of Pennsylvania. My current scholarship is on anti-racism, but not as you might think. I critique many initiatives of anti-racism for being more disempowering of the people it's trying to help than empowering. So I approach it with some scrutiny, and that does not make me the most popular person in the world these days, but I feel it has to be said. Part of the issues that I see is the evasion of debate, right? As a way of making meaning and coming to resolutions on things. And also the tension between the concepts of an activist and a scholar. I'll try to talk about one at a time. In my mind, they overlap. I'll try to talk about one at a time. So
yeah, sure.
The issue with debate, it seems to be a word these days, and there are a couple of reasons for that, as far as I can see. The first one is that when you debate somebody, especially if that somebody has opinions or thoughts that are beyond the pale, right, egregiously offensive and incorrect, then you are, in a sense, dignifying that person's stance by even talking to that person. So the term deplatform has become popular for this reason. You don't give that person a platform, you don't let that person speak, right? So I understand that, but at the same time, I see a lot of people whose opinions are not beyond the pale, whose opinions are not really opinions even, but just critical inquiries, requests for elaboration, requests for clarification on certain things, requests for proof, which seems to be an offensive thing to do these days. So I think that's a problem. And it's a problem for obvious reasons, but I think the most serious reason is that these are evaded because there are certain narratives and viewpoints and goals that don't stand up to scrutiny, right? If you're pointing out the emperor clothes, then you're not very popular, and a debate will give you the chance to do that sometimes. So, you know, if a goal is hard fought and imperative for improving the world, you want to protect that, you know, even if it's flawed. So this avoidance of debate is a concern. I think we need to talk. I think there are various people who have opinions for various good reasons, and they need to be heard and not silenced. And the people who are doing the silencing don't see that they're becoming the monsters they're trying to fight, and censoring people and not allowing them to say their piece. I'll say this lastly about debate. I often joke that winning is for losers, And what I mean is that if the main point of your argument is to win, is to beat this person, is to vanquish your enemy, and then you're closing yourself off to the collaboration and the adaptive leadership I think we need right now. And if you're talking and collaborating and competing in the original sense of the word, to run with, right? Not necessarily run against. If you're trying to dialogue to, come to a resolution, winning can't be your primary objective. The truth, or a pragmatic and effective strategy has to be your main goal. So when I ask for a debate or I participate in a debate, I'm not a competitor so much as I am a conduit or catalyst for an exploration of the best ways to go about things, the best practices for resolving societal issues. So that's my take on debate.
Sure. And what sort of things are you coming up sort of against, currently in terms of what people are prepared to debate and what their sort of concerns? Typically, what kind of subject areas do you find that troublesome in?
Well, it comes up a lot in social justice. I should have started with that. I'm not talking about debates, that really have no bearing on the contemporary society right now. A lot of things are going on in 2020, from a global pandemic to social justice issues, police brutality, and things like that. The resolution, reforming the police, for instance. I mean, that is something that I feel needs to happen to some degree. And, instead of having a conversation about that, people are so adamant to make sure that it happens that they are avoiding those conversations. I'm talking specifically about my field, labeled rhetoric and composition by most of my colleagues. And the topic is usually anti-racism or, racial justice. The desire to have debates about those things is almost non-existent, right? And it's necessary to have these debates. It's one thing to write an op-ed, right, in a newspaper, which is kind of, a one-way situation, monological. It's yet another thing to try to publish in a peer-reviewed journal, which can take years. From the second you start to the second, it's in print, could literally take years. In this on-demand society we have right now, we don't have time for print in those particular media. Face-to-face, real-time debate imperative right now. And I mean, situations like this are very nice, but when two people are coming from different places, but they both want the same thing. They both want racism. They both want racial justice. They both want police reform. But they disagree on the methodology. They have to talk, and I think they have to be seen talking. And I think they have to model not just civility, but critical thinking to the best of their ability that is that avoids fallacy, and avoids the desire to win and embraces real solution to these problems, right? So it's not about one person or the other, it's about the resolution. I think that needs to happen. It's not happening in my field for the reasons I gave earlier. They don't want to dignify certain positions, but also don't want to risk their position being proven wrong or fallacious.
Yeah, I wonder what you think is the real kind of deep-seated reason that people avoid debate, and in particular, kind of live public debates and so on. Is it really the fear that they're going to hear something that they simply don't want to dignify? Or I just wonder whether there's some other urge going on that's, that's a sort of wider social imperative. I don't know what you feel about that. That just doesn't It's all about tolerating other people's opinions. I sense there's something deeper going on.
I think the issue is ideological. You know, there's a they have a certain goal. They have vested interest in that goal, and they're taking a by any means necessary approach. If I can quote Malcolm X for a second, you know, if I have to silence this person and express fallacious beliefs and things like that, ignore data that doesn't square with what I want, I will do that in order to get this outcome, which in a sense is noble, right? Because you want to make the world a better place and you're willing to do whatever it takes to acquire that goal, even if it means relinquishing some academic integrity, right? Which gets into the activist scholar tension I want to talk about momentarily. So I think that's it, is trying to protect a secure base and not risking that being destroyed or proven false. What do you think?
Yeah, in Europe, we hear quite a lot about deplatforming.
Yes.
And do you think that kind of is kind of in a way overprotecting people from views? I mean, there is an argument that you need to be kind of subjected to different views in order to know what you're dealing with, in order to understand the threat better, if you like.
Wayne Booth called it listening rhetoric. And it means actually trying to figure out what this person is saying, not just to better refute them, that's a subcategory of listening rhetoric, but to better understand where they're coming from so that, you can address them or respond to them adequately and appropriately. If you don't know what people are thinking, then you're projecting thoughts onto them, you're assuming what they're thinking, and you're running with it. That is happening a lot in my field with scholars who should know better. They're making assumptions and they're running with those assumptions as opposed to looking into things, actually talking to the person with whom they disagree. And again, I think their positions are so precarious that they fear the slightest opposition will, have it crumble like a deck of a tower of cards, whatever the metaphor is.
Yeah. Sure. And you mentioned the phrase "by any means possible," and I think sort of just going forward to the other topic I know you're going to talk about of activism and scholarship, which I'd like to explore a bit. Is that really the case there, that the activist feels that they're kind of allowed to take whatever action they like simply to achieve the ends that they like?
I think that's primary tension, yes. The scholar activist debate, if you will, is nothing new. People have written and published about it and talked about it for quite some time now. I think because society is giving us a robust case study right now, I think the topic needs to be, it needs to reemerge. I think the major tension between the scholar and the activist is a tension between what the late philosopher Richard Paul called fair-minded critical thinking and sophistic critical thinking. Sophistic in the Platonic sense of people who are using fallacies and rhetoric to trick, for lack of a better term, right now, right? As opposed to really get at the truth. I can't read this whole thing, but Paul describes sophistic critical thinking as thinking which meets epistemological demands insofar as they square with the vested interest of the thinker. The fair-minded critical thinker, meets epistemological demands regardless of his or her ideological commitments or interests. That is the I'm seeing right now between a scholar and an activist. A scholar will look at the the actual data. I wrote down something I learned from Hannah Arendt. The raw material of sheer happening. I love that term. The scholar will look at that, right, and take it for what it is. The activist will look at what will best help him or her meet certain needs. That's not always the case. Now, I know there are scholars who consider themselves activists at certain points, activists who consider themselves scholars at certain points. Both things can definitely inform each other. But the Venn diagram of a scholar and an activist is not one circle. It is two circles that overlap, sometimes substantially, but they are two distinct circles. And a scholar, acting as a scholar, will take the data, take the information, and work with that. And an activist is less inclined to do so. You know, I mean, you can see this in contemporary issues with anti-racism and violence in Black communities, and the rate at which Black people die on a daily basis from gun violence. We're talking a lot about police gun violence, and we need to. But there's also gang violence going on as well. And if you look at the numbers, that is just as much, if not often more, of an issue than police violence. The scholar looks at all of that and to assess the situation. But you will be hard pressed to hear, people who are fighting for defunding the police to also fight for ending gang violence. You don't see it much. It happens. I've seen people. I've been that person. Right? It happens, but it doesn't get much media play. In my experience, I'm part of a listserv for rhetoric and composition. And as I said earlier in this talk, my work is on the critique of anti-racism and how it can be a more robust practice than what it is right now. I expressed those views on this listserv, and it did not go over well. Let's just let's put it that way. So I share this with you because what came out of that listserv debacle were, as far as my knowledge, 2 podcasts and an article talking about the racism in that thread. Racism.
Wow.
Now, the primary voice in that thread, by far, was mine. A Black man wanting to create a more empowered anti-racism and seeing their version as, frankly, infantilizing and disempowering. All right, so obviously like that, but both podcasts and the article said this situation without describing what exactly was racist, without mentioning that the primary dissenter was a Black man. None of that was mentioned. Now, it doesn't mean that I'm definitely right about these issues. I think I am, but it doesn't mean that. The fact that they would leave out that information that would change the narrative they were putting forth vastly, right?
Yes.
The fact that they would leave that out is what I'm talking about. A scholar doesn't leave that out. A scholar mentions that the dissenting voice was a Black man saying this, that, and the other thing, regardless of whether that person agrees with me or not. That person acknowledges that. That's what a scholar does. An activist pretends it didn't happen and doesn't mention it and just runs with this idea that something that they're not going to describe or explain, right?
Yeah.
So that's the tension between scholar and activist that I'm seeing right now, and it is rampant in academic circles, where which is supposed to be the headquarters of scholars, right?
Yeah.
So that's what I see as a concern.
Yes, and if one can't rely on scholarship to give you the facts, then it is of itself flawed. I mean, we've got to be able to rely on the facts surrounding each argument and discussion, surely.
Yes. I agree.
And just further back, you mentioned the fact that, you know, in rhetoric itself, people distrust the use of language to kind of obfuscate and to mislead. I'm always, you know, really fascinated on the role of language itself in all of this. You know, in order to clarify, I mean, the original speech writers and sophists and rhetoricians were distrusted because it was felt that they were kind of manipulating the truth with fancy words. And I wonder if you have a feel for, or kind of recommendations for, how we approach these difficult things, and the, you know, how we find the right language for them. Maybe that would help debate to evolve if we had a, you know, a better take on language and rhetoric.
I think a better take on debate would be a start. As I said before, the attachment to winning, and the fact that words are considered violence these days, literally, and writers from the New York Times will insist on that, right? There's this concept creep of violence. I mean, if you say something that doesn't square with what I believe, then you are attacking me. You're not agreeing with me, you're attacking me. I was told by somebody on that infamous listserv thread I spoke of a few moments ago that I don't understand the violence, harm my body is doing by saying the words I'm saying, right? By critiquing anti-racism, I'm doing harm to Black people. That is a common standpoint. That is a common opinion. Looking at words as inherently violent will only stifle debate and dialogue. It can do nothing else. I think we need to look at debate differently. Debate is not me against you. It's me with you trying to work out our ideas, you know, for a resolution that ideally helps everybody involved, right? That's how we have to look at the situation. So when I think of debate, I don't think of the, I don't know what it's called throughout the globe, but we call it the Lincoln Douglas style debate, in which the moderator and one person speaks and the other person refutes and the other person gets to respond. And we don't need that kind of formality. When I talk about debate, I talk about, you know, let's sit down and have a dialogue. Yes, okay, sure, we can have a moderator, whatever. We can work on the rules of engagement together, right? As long as we engage. And I guess I think the idea of debate as war, as seriously dangerous to one's well-being, is the problem.
Because I find that utterly extraordinary. Where do you think? Where's that notion of words as violence? That strikes me as new and really quite dangerous.
I think it's quite dangerous as well. Well, I can't really cite authors right now, and I definitely don't want to cite emails right now and put people's names out there. But it is a thing. The New York Times just apologized for publishing an article by a senator who said, you know, maybe the National Guard may need to be brought in if the riots escalate. Many of the staff called that, you know, that was harmful to us. You know, that was a violent, you know, take on things. So the idea that words can do harm, if that's the case, then you're going to avoid those words. If you avoid words, then we're getting away from democracy, aren't we? Deliberative democracy, the power of conversation. And I think
and the conversation to bring people together as much as
for understanding, for meaning making, for bringing people together. You know, for seeing what new ideas emerge organically from a conversation. right?
Yeah.
If we go into a situation, I mean, we can go into a situation with a definite opinion or a belief, right? But if we don't do what the theorist Otto Scharmer calls walk into a situation with open heart, open mind, and open will, right? And we are fighting, we are battling, we are protecting ourselves as opposed to trying to understand the other person. So, and that's another take on debate, right? It's not only is it not a battle, but it's also something, a space in which new ideas can emerge in ways they wouldn't have otherwise.
Yeah, exactly. And do you think the background of all of this is a corrupt political society? And by that I mean a small p, you know, not necessarily individual politicians or parties, but just a corruption in you know, social politics, if you like.
Well, yes, you know, and this is beyond the whole confirmation bias and the echo chambers that are created on social media and things like that. The idea isn't to talk. The idea is to protect your stance. Period.
Yeah.
You know, and if that's the idea, if that's the primary goal, then you're already setting yourself up for battles, not collaborations, not conversations, battles, verbal battles, hopefully just verbal battles, and you know, not something that escalates. But that's the issue. I really think we have to transcend that in some way, and not be so, as some psychologists would say, connected to an outcome, which means so attached to an outcome that its loss feels like a loss of our very personhood. You know, we have to get beyond that. You know, I don't think everybody needs to become a Buddhist monk, but we need to non-attach, you know, from these ideas to a certain extent. And we're not doing that. We're doing the complete opposite.
I wonder whether these, I mean, I'm not going to kind of accuse social media, but I wonder whether social media does make this worse. And for this reason, that actually social media does disconnect us. We feel as though we're kind of separate. I mean, although we can communicate with people across the globe, we are actually communicating in isolation and very separately. And we don't sort of see people's reactions. We don't see the emotions. We don't see the person. And therefore, I wonder whether that polarizes situations and makes them more difficult and makes people's kind of beliefs even more entrenched. If you can't debate directly, and by that I mean in person.
Yeah. I don't know if social media platforms are really the best place to, I mean, I think they can be great places to have a conversation and teach and things like that. I am I'm a member of Heterodox Rhetoric and Composition, a Facebook group in which we try to do just that. And we're not just having conversations, we're modeling, you know, civil, good faith conversations, even if we don't agree, you know, especially if we don't agree. And we try to come to understandings. So it is possible, but it's also possible to hide behind a keyboard, be a keyboard warrior, and dehumanize the person on the other end. There's a term called solipsistic introjection, which means that you're imagining the person's voice in your head, you know, and that includes intonation and, in a sense, intention, right? And that person may not be that at all, but you already run the idea that you're arguing A, with a particular kind of person who you've never met, B, and that often goes into a downward spiral of vitriol and hate that is hard to recover from.
And I sense that within some social media platforms, the notion of outrage becomes, you know, kind of takes over, that people feel they can be outraged all the time, and you know that anybody else's opinion leads to that emotion, which
I mean, the outrage is a justification to do whatever you want, and say whatever you want to somebody, including not just deplatforming, but canceling, as they say these days. There have been attempts to cancel me in various ways. I'm trying to not get canceled. But what the outrage does, it justifies, you know, being uncivil, or it justifies incivility towards the person creating the outrage, right? And this person does not deserve the civility, that is supposed to be the engine of a democratic society, right? This person doesn't deserve that. This person needs to be ostracized for the greater good, right? So by canceling this person, by ruining this person's life, I'm a hero, right? And even if that person's thoughts are egregious, 9 times out of 10, that person thinks he or she is doing the right thing. And if we can be outraged, but if we can not have that outrage have us, you know what I mean? But have the outrage and acknowledge it as outrage, not let it play us like puppets, then we're moving in the right direction.
And how do we protect debate? I mean, you're a wonderful example of somebody who is prepared to stand up and speak their minds and be open and fair. But is it simply that we need people, to come forward? How do we protect things from getting even worse?
Well, as far as I'm concerned, tenure helps. I mean, I'll be honest about that. There are people whose job situations are precarious enough to have them, refrain from taking stands that may not be popular or that may cause outrage or something like that. This is a lot of what's going on right now is a rule by fear. If you overcome that fear, you're on your way. I don't fear people's opinions, even without the whole tenure thing. I don't really fear people coming out at me, troops, the mob mentality and things like that. It's just a fact of life right now, like rain and the common cold and things like that. It's just it is what it is. I shrug it off. Not everybody's there yet, and we have to figure out ways to get there. And I'm at a loss as to how to go about doing that, but that's what needs to happen.
Well, thank you, Eric. It's been an absolutely wonderful discussion with you, and I'm, just so full of admiration for your independence of thought and therefore of direction. It's really kind of uplifting to come across people who are still prepared to be independent. That's what I've felt in the past 3 or 4 months, that with lockdown and with the whole approach that the world has taken, that our independence of thinking, our independence of approach is what's most at risk in all of this. Just to be individual, I mean, feels like it's almost difficult now. So when I come across truly independent thinkers, it's always very, very inspiring and uplifting.
Thank you. I try my best. I really want, this idea of independence, as you say, to reemerge. It's not really happening right now. There's a mob mentality. And if you don't conform, you are in danger of being ostracized, canceled, however you want to say it. And I think the need to overcome that is imperative. So I'm doing my best. I'm willing to take some shots if I need to.
Wonderful, Eric. Well, thank you so much. It's been a real joy to chat to you, and I hope we'll have a chance to revisit this and further down the line, and things will have changed and moved on. But as I say, it's been just a fantastic pleasure to have you here as part of Rhetoric Remix. It's been a great joy. Thank you.
And thank you for having me.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Eric.
You're welcome.